My name is Yasmin Alexander, and I'm 33 years old. Before I get into the full story, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. And if you've ever had to choose between money and your child's safety, leave a comment. I read them. Because sometimes life doesn't give you good options. It just hands you a clock and dares you to decide before it runs out. My story starts in December, almost 2 years ago, when I got the news that the machine shop where I'd worked for over a decade would be shutting down right after Christmas. The moment my supervisor handed me that notice, the paper felt heavier than metal. Not because it was thick, because it was final. I was a single mom to Jamie, my 6-year-old boy. His father had disappeared long before Jamie could really understand what that meant. And when I say disappeared, I don't mean dramatic shouting matches and slammed doors. I mean, one day he was there, and then he wasn't, like a light bulb that never came back on. We'd already been balancing on the edge for years. Rent, groceries, Jamie's school supplies. Every month was a math problem with no correct answer. And the biggest weight of all was the medical debt from when Jamie had severe pneumonia. I still remembered the hospital room, the machines, the way I held my son's tiny hand and promised him, through a throat full of fear, that I wouldn't let the world take him from me. So when that pink slip landed in my hands, my first thought wasn't me. It was Jamie, his bright eyes in the morning, the way he'd press his face into my shoulder when he was sleepy, the way he trusted me like the world made sense. And suddenly it didn't. That night, I sat at our small kitchen table in our cramped apartment, staring at my bills like they were enemies. I heard Jamie humming in the bedroom while he played with his toy cars, blissfully unaware that my entire life was cracking in half. My hands were shaking when my phone rang. The screen showed a name I hadn't seen in months: Steve, an old coworker who'd moved to North Dakota the year before. I almost didn't answer because I didn't have the energy to pretend I was okay. But I did. And Steve didn't even waste time with small talk. "Yasmin," he said, voice bright like he'd been waiting to deliver this line. "I heard the shop is closing. Listen, my construction company needs a site manager. Salary is $95,000 a year." I didn't breathe. That number didn't sound real. It sounded like something people said in movies right before their lives changed. "That's double what I make," I whispered. "I know," he said. "You'd be great. But there's one thing." "There's always one thing." "You've got to come live in Willis," Steve continued. "And you can't bring a kid. Conditions out here aren't suitable. It's brutal. Dorm housing, long shifts, dangerous cold, not a place for children." The silence after that felt like the world holding its breath. Because suddenly I could see both futures in my head, like two doors I was standing between. Door one, I stay. I scramble. I beg for overtime that doesn't exist anymore. I fall behind. We lose the apartment. Jamie watches me break in slow motion. Door two, I leave. I take the job. I send money back. I build something stable. But Jamie stays behind. That night, I sat beside Jamie's bed, stroking his hair while he slept, and I realized something that made me feel sick. A mother can love her child with everything she has, and still not have enough to protect him. The next day, I drove to the only person left who could possibly help. My mother, Frances. We hadn't been close since I left home at 18. My childhood with her wasn't warm. It wasn't soft. It was rules and quiet judgment, and the feeling that love had to be earned like rent. But she was still Jamie's grandmother, and I told myself she wouldn't hurt her own grandson. In her small living room, my mother listened without much expression. Her eyes flicked toward my father's portrait on the wall, like she was asking permission from a ghost. I swallowed hard. "Mom, can you watch Jamie for me?" I asked. "Just for about 2 years. I'll send money regularly." For a moment, her face softened, just a flicker, when she looked at the photo of Jamie I'd brought in my wallet. Then she returned to stone. $2,000 a month, she said. "Raising a child isn't cheap, especially at my age." 2,000. I went home and stayed up all night calculating numbers like they were prayers. With the new salary, after paying my mother, I could still save thousands a month. In 2 years, I could put a down payment on a house in a better neighborhood, one with good schools, a backyard, stability. A future where Jamie wouldn't feel that constant invisible panic that follows poor kids into adulthood. After days of hesitation and a pile of promises from my mother, I agreed. When I brought my luggage to her house, my mother rested a hand on Jamie's shoulder, almost like she remembered how to be gentle. "I'll take care of him," she said firmly. "Don't worry." Jamie clung to me the morning I left. His face was wet, his little arms locked around my waist like he could anchor me to the floor. "Mom, don't go," he cried. "Please." My throat burned so badly I thought I might choke, But I forced myself to smile because if I broke, he would break harder. I'll call every night, I promised him. Just 2 years. And then we'll have a beautiful house with a big backyard. You'll play outside and never worry again. As the bus pulled away from Erie, I watched them through the window, my mother and my son shrinking into the distance. My heart was full of sorrow mixed with hope, and I had no idea I had just handed my child over to a nightmare. The first days in Willis were a blur of cold and guilt. Even through the screen, I could see Jamie struggling. Every video call, he cried. "When are you coming back?" he'd sob. And every time he asked, it felt like someone tightened a wire around my ribs. My mother would appear during the calls, holding him close, comforting him with patience I'd never seen from her. It was almost convincing, almost enough to quiet the sick feeling in my stomach. After a week, my mother called me privately. "You should limit the calls for a few weeks," she said gently. "He'll adapt easier if he isn't constantly reminded you're gone." It sounded reasonable. It sounded responsible. So I cut it down. And to distract myself from the silence, I worked like my life depended on it, because in a way, it did. 12-hour shifts, 6 days a week, wind so cold it felt like it could erase you, nights in a cramped dorm room with 3 other workers, the walls thin enough to hear everything. Snoring, boots dropping, laughter that sounded emptier than it should. I kept a little shrine for Jamie beside my bed, photos taped to the wall, drawings he'd made, a folded note with his crooked handwriting. Whenever I felt like quitting, I stared at his smile until my body remembered why I couldn't. As months passed, things seemed better. Jamie stopped crying every call. He told me about school, about friends, about getting an A in math. I would close my eyes and pretend his happiness meant I'd made the right choice. But then it changed. Around the 10th month, Jamie started going quiet. He'd answer in short sentences. He'd avoid the camera. His smile looked like it was borrowed from someone else. And whenever I pushed, whenever I asked, "What's wrong?" my mother would step in like a curtain. "He's being teased," she'd say. "Kids can be cruel. He needs time." And then, almost like clockwork, she'd mention money. A special program. Vitamins. A field trip. I sent extra, always. 500. 700. Whatever she asked. Because every dollar I sent felt like a stitch holding my son's future together. After 11 months, I'd sent home nearly $30,000. I should have felt secure. Instead, I felt haunted. Then one Friday, my manager pulled me into his office. "You've earned a 1-week leave," he said, smiling like he was giving me a gift. My heart jumped. A week meant Jamie. A week meant looking into my son's eyes in real life and figuring out what those silences really meant. I decided not to tell my mother. I wanted to surprise Jamie. I wanted one moment in this nightmare where I could see him run to me and prove I hadn't ruined everything. My friend and only real support in Willis, Mike, another parent grinding their life down for their kids, heard my plan and immediately frowned. "Buy a plane ticket," he warned. "Weather's turning bad. Don't risk losing time." So I spent $800 on a flight without blinking. I bought Jamie gifts too, a new winter coat and a ship model he'd pointed out during a call months ago. I imagined his face lighting up. I imagined his laugh bursting out like sunlight. That night I called him like usual. Jamie appeared on screen looking tired. His eyes were distant, like he was watching me from somewhere far away. "How was your day?" I asked, keeping my voice cheerful. He shrugged. "Fine." My chest tightened. "Do you miss me?" His voice came out small. "Yeah, I miss you." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "I miss you too, baby. We'll be reunited soon, I promise." As I was about to end the call, my mother stepped into frame. "Oh, by the way," she said, pretending it was casual. "The school requires an extra $400 for a field trip. He really wants to go." I agreed. Of course I did. My mother's mouth twitched into something that looked like a smile, and then the call ended. The next day, after the long flight, I stepped out into the cold, eerie air and inhaled like I was trying to breathe my son back into my lungs. I took a taxi straight to my mother's house. It was around 4 p.m. Light snow fell like ash. I stood at the walkway gripping my phone, camera ready to capture the surprise because I wanted proof. Proof of joy. Proof that this sacrifice meant something. But the house was silent. No lights, no TV, no movement. The snow on the path looked untouched. I knocked. Once, twice, 3 times. No answer. My mother's car was parked outside, so they had to be nearby. I found the spare key in the planter, same place she'd kept it my whole life, and unlocked the door. The smell hit me immediately. Not cookies, not clean laundry. Something sour, old, rotting. My stomach turned. "Mom," I called into the darkness. "Jamie?" No response. I stepped inside. The living room was a mess. Clothes on the floor, empty boxes, bottles, newspapers. It looked like a home that had stopped caring whether it was seen. My heart began to pound louder than my footsteps. Then I heard it. A small sound, a faint movement from the kitchen. I followed it, phone still recording, my hand numb around it. And when I reached the kitchen and flipped the light on, I saw my son. And the world inside me broke. Jamie was on the floor, restrained near the table, curled up like he was trying to disappear. A bowl of old soup sat nearby, swarmed by flies. When the light snapped on, he flinched like a frightened animal. And in a thin, broken whisper, he said, "I'm sorry, I'll be good. Please don't hit me." My lungs forgot how to work. I dropped my phone onto the counter and fell to my knees, hands shaking as I rushed to him. "Jamie," I whispered. "Baby, it's me. It's Mom. I'm here." His eyes lifted slowly, wide with fear, then confusion, then the smallest, weakest spark of recognition. "Mom?" he asked, like he was afraid the word itself would get him punished. I nodded, tears spilling before I could stop them. "Yes, it's me. I've got you." I freed him with trembling fingers, pulling him into my arms. He felt too light, too small, like the child I'd left had been replaced with a shadow. He clung to me like I might vanish. And then I heard the front door open. Heavy footsteps. Jamie's body went rigid in my arms. Terror flooded his face so fast it was like someone had flipped a switch. I held him tighter, pressing my lips to his hair. "Stay with me," I whispered. "I'm right here." The footsteps came closer. And in the hallway I saw her, Frances Walsh, my mother, walking in with liquor store bags, like she'd just returned from an ordinary errand. Her eyes widened when she saw me, but the surprise lasted only a second. Then her expression hardened into annoyance, like I was the problem in her day. And she asked, flat and cold, "Why are you here?" Frances stood in the hallway like she owned the air in my lungs. Liquor bags swung lightly from her wrist, the glass inside clinking like punctuation, like even the bottles were amused by my shock. I didn't answer her question right away. I couldn't, because if I opened my mouth, I was terrified only one sound would come out. A scream. Instead, I shifted Jamie behind me without letting go of him. My arms tightened around his small body, and I felt him tremble like a leaf in a storm. My mother's gaze flicked to him for half a second. Not pity, not guilt, just irritation, like a stain she'd failed to scrub out. "Why are you here?" she repeated, sharper. "I thought you were in North Dakota." My throat burned. My voice came out broken and low. "What did you do to my son?" Frances exhaled as if I'd asked her something unreasonable, like I'd interrupted her evening plans with drama. She set the liquor bags down on the kitchen table, right beside the bowl of rotten soup. That contrast, the casualness of it, made something snap inside me. "Don't be so melodramatic, Yasmin," she said. "I had to tie the boy up so he wouldn't run around everywhere. I have my own life. I can't watch him all day." The words hit me like fists. Tie the boy up, as if Jamie were a dog, as if he were furniture that needed to be secured. My vision blurred. I looked down at Jamie's ankles again, the raw skin, the swelling, the marks that weren't accidents. I swallowed hard and tried to force my voice steady. "Where have you been?" I asked. "Why was he alone in the dark? Why does he look like this?" Frances crossed her arms. Her face didn't change. "The boy is difficult," she said simply. "He cried for you night after night, very noisy. Do you know how exhausting that is at my age?" Jamie flinched at her voice, his fingers clutching my shirt tighter. And that's when I knew something that made my blood go cold. He wasn't just scared. He was trained. Like fear had become routine for him. I stepped forward, still holding Jamie, forcing my body between him and Frances like I could physically block her words from reaching him. "I sent you money," I said, each syllable shaking. "I sent you everything you asked for." Frances lifted one eyebrow. "Hmm?" That tiny sound, that dismissive little hum, like money was just noise. "I sent over $30,000, I continued, louder now, rage pushing through the grief. "For Jamie, for food, clothes, school, medicine, everything." I scanned the kitchen with frantic eyes, searching for proof I was wrong. But there was no sign of Jamie's life. No drawings on the fridge, no clean backpack, no toys scattered in the corner. Just empties, dirt, neglect. And then my eyes landed on what was new. A sleek flat-screen TV in the living room that hadn't been there before. Expensive shoeboxes by the wall. Bottles, so many bottles. I turned back to her slowly, my voice trembling with something dangerous. "Where's the money, Mom?" Frances didn't flinch. She didn't even pretend to think. Her eyes met mine with a cold steadiness that made my skin crawl. "I never lied," she said, calm as ice. "I just didn't specify which child I'd be taking care of." For a second, my brain refused to understand the sentence, like it was too monstrous to be real. What? I whispered, leaning against the counter because my legs suddenly felt useless. What do you mean? Frances moved past me like I wasn't there. She opened her cabinet, pulled out a glass, and poured herself whiskey with the same practice motion she used to pour orange juice when I was a kid. She took a slow sip. Then she said it. Dale needed money. He just got out of prison. Nobody will hire him. He needs a fresh start. My stomach dropped so hard I thought I might throw up. Dale, my brother, the one who'd been the family star growing up, the one Frances defended through every mess, the one who could do no wrong even when he'd done everything wrong. You gave my money to Dale? I choked out. Money for my son? Frances shrugged, like I'd asked why the sky was blue. Dale is my son too. I stared at her. Then I looked down at Jamie, his hollow cheeks, the way he couldn't stop shaking, the way his eyes darted like he expected pain to come from any direction. And something inside me turned from grief into fire. But Jamie is a child, I said, voice rising. He's your grandson. Frances set the glass down with a firm click. He's still alive, she said flatly. Isn't he? Jamie whimpered softly and pressed his face into my shoulder. I couldn't breathe. I turned away, stepping toward the corner where Jamie's backpack lay. It looked wrong immediately. Dusty, crushed like it hadn't been touched in weeks. My hands moved on their own as I grabbed it and unzipped it. Empty. No books. No notebook. No pencil. Just dust and a stale smell of old fabric. My head snapped toward Francis. He hasn't been going to school, I said, voice shaking with disbelief. Has he? Frances sighed like I was exhausting her. Too much trouble, she said. He cried. He embarrassed me. And honestly, Yasmin, you weren't here. So what did you expect me to do? A loud buzzing filled my ears. My whole body started to shake. The field trip, I whispered, realizing something so obvious it made me sick. That wasn't real. The extra programs, the vitamins, none of that was real. Frances's lips curled slightly. Not into a smile. Into something uglier. Money is money, she said. You sent it. I used it. I set Jamie down gently onto the kitchen chair. My hands were trembling so badly, I didn't trust myself to hold him while I stood in front of her. He looked up at me, eyes wide with panic. Mom, please, he whispered, like he thought I was going to leave him there again. I cupped his face, forcing a steady tone. I'm right here, I promised. Don't move. Don't listen to her. And I'm here. Then I turned back to Frances. I'm calling the police, I said. Frances didn't beg, didn't panic, didn't apologize. She just laughed, cold and sharp. You abandoned your child here, she snapped. You left him. You don't get to pretend you're some hero now. The words struck deep because they landed on the one place I couldn't protect. My guilt. My mother saw it immediately, like she'd been waiting for the chance to use it. You think you're a good mother? She continued, stepping closer. You ran away to make money. You just wanted to escape being responsible. At least I stayed. My hands clenched into fists so tight my nails cut into my palms. I wanted to scream. I wanted to hit something. I wanted to rewind time until none of this had happened. But behind her, I saw Jamie. Standing in the doorway now, small and shaking, watching us like he was watching a bomb tick down. And that was the moment my anger turned sharp and clear. I couldn't afford to fall apart. Not now. Not in front of him. I took one last look at Frances and said low and deadly, You are never touching my son again. Then I scooped Jamie into my arms. His fingers locked around my neck like he thought the world might steal me away if he loosened his grip. As I carried him toward the front door, the cold wind slipped in through the cracks like it was waiting for us. Frances followed, still shouting, still trying to stab me with words. You think the police will side with you? She hissed. You left him here. You're the one who disappeared. I didn't answer. Because if I did, I might have given her what she wanted. Control. Outside, snow hit my face. Jamie shivered violently against me. I pulled out my phone with one hand and dialed 911. When the dispatcher answered, my voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. I need to report child abuse, I said. My son was restrained. He's malnourished. He has injuries. His grandmother, Frances Walsh, did this. I'm taking him to Erie General Hospital right now. My words came out fast, clipped, like I was afraid if I paused, I'd start crying and never stop. After I gave the address, I ended the call and looked around. 3 houses down, a porch light glowed warmly. Mrs. Mildred Parker, the elderly neighbor who'd lived near my mother forever. I didn't even think. I ran. Jamie's breath was hot against my neck, his body trembling, his face buried in my coat. When I knocked, the door opened quickly, and Mrs. Mildred's eyes widened in horror at what she saw. Dear God, she whispered. Then she stepped aside immediately. "Come in, hurry." The warmth inside her home hit me like a wave. Cookies, clean air, soft light. It made the contrast unbearable. Mrs. Mildred grabbed a blanket and wrapped Jamie carefully, her hands trembling as she did it. Then she looked up at me with wet eyes and said words that made my stomach twist. "I've been watching this for months." My breath caught. "You knew?" I demanded, voice cracking. "Why didn't you tell me?" Mrs. Mildred flinched, like I'd slapped her with the accusation. "I tried," she said quickly. "I called Child Protective Services 3 times. They came once, but Francis was prepared. House spotless. Jamie bathed, smiling, like a performance." I stared at her, dizzy. "And I tried calling you," she continued, voice trembling. "But the number Francis gave me, it wasn't yours." My heart pounded. Jamie sat silently in a chair now, clutching the blanket, hands shaking as he lifted a cup of warm milk Mrs. Mildred had placed in front of him. I could see bruises on his arms under the light, marks I hadn't been allowed to see on camera. Mrs. Mildred lowered her voice. "And Yasmin," she said carefully. I turned to her. Her face tightened like she was afraid of what she was about to say. "Your brother," she whispered. "Dale, he's been coming here too." My blood turned to ice. "What?" I croaked. She nodded, eyes full of fear. "He came regularly, took money, yelled at Francis. I've seen her look scared of him. And he threatened me, said he'd burn my house down if I interfered again." For a second, the room tilted. Because it wasn't just Francis. It wasn't just neglect. It was a network of cruelty. Family. I pulled out my phone again with shaking hands and called 911 back, adding everything Mrs. Mildred said. Then I knelt in front of Jamie, forcing myself to soften my face, to make my voice gentle. "Sweetheart," I said, holding his tiny hands, "we're going to the hospital now. Doctors will help you, and I'll stay with you every second, okay?" Jamie's eyes, those once bright eyes, looked at me with fear so old it didn't belong in a child. And then he asked the question that shattered me completely. "Are you going to take me back to Grandma again?" My throat closed. I pulled him into my arms so tightly he squeaked. "Never," I whispered. "Never, ever. You're with me now." Mrs. Mildred handed me a slip of paper with her phone number. "I'll stay here," she said firmly, wiping her eyes. "I'll tell the police everything. I'll be a witness." As I carried Jamie back out into the snow, my phone began to buzz. Francis calling. Again, and again, and again. I didn't answer. I couldn't, because for the first time in my life, I understood something with terrifying clarity. The woman who raised me wasn't just cold. She was dangerous. And I had been naive enough to hand her my child. In the taxi, Jamie clung to me like he was afraid the car would stop and the nightmare would return. I held his hand and stared out into the falling snow, my mind racing with one thought. If I hadn't come back today, how much worse would it have gotten? Erie General Hospital glowed ahead of us like a beacon. But I already knew. This was just the beginning. Because saving Jamie was one battle. The next battle was making sure Francis and Dale paid for what they did. And whatever that cost me, I was ready. The automatic doors of Erie General Hospital slid open with a mechanical sigh, and I felt like I was stepping out of one nightmare and into another. Bright fluorescent lights flooded the hallway. Too clean, too unforgiving. Every bruise on Jamie's arms, every mark around his ankles, every hollow line in his face suddenly looked sharper, like the truth had nowhere left to hide. A nurse rushed toward us the moment she saw Jamie. "Oh my God," she breathed, already reaching for a wheelchair. "What happened?" "He was restrained," I said, my voice shaking but clear. "He hasn't been eating properly. Please, please help him." Jamie whimpered as they gently lifted him from my arms. His fingers clutched at my sleeve until the last second, panic flaring in his eyes. "I'm right here," I promised, walking beside him as they wheeled him down the hall. "I'm not going anywhere." They took him into an exam room and the doors closed. That sound, the click of the latch, felt heavier than anything I'd heard all day. I stood there frozen, staring at the wall, my hands still curled like they were holding him. Minutes later, a doctor stepped out. Dr. Sarah Levine, her badge read. Her face was calm, professional, but her eyes were tight. "Ms. Alexander," she said gently, "your son is severely underweight for his age. There are signs of prolonged malnutrition and repeated restraint. We're starting IV fluids now and documenting everything." Documenting. That word sent a shiver through me. "Is he going to be okay?" I asked, barely able to breathe. She hesitated just long enough to be honest. "Physically," she said, "yes, with care. Emotionally, that will take time." I nodded, swallowing the guilt that burned like acid in my throat. While Jamie was being treated, a social worker arrived. His name was Davis, and he carried a thick folder under his arm, the kind that meant lives were about to be dissected into bullet points and timelines. He sat across from me in a small consultation room. "I'm handling Jamie's case," he said calmly. "I need you to tell me everything, from the moment you left him with your mother." So I did. I told him about the job, the money, the video calls, the excuses, the silence that crept in where laughter used to be. I told him about the soup, the rope, the words Jamie whispered like apologies for existing. When I finished, my hands were shaking so badly I had to clasp them together. Davis leaned back, his jaw tight. "There are two paths forward," he said carefully. "First, the criminal case, child abuse, and neglect. The police are already questioning your mother. Second, a civil suit to recover the money and ensure full custody and protection for your son." He paused, then added quietly, "Both paths will be complicated, especially since this involves family." I didn't hesitate. "I want both," I said. Davis searched my face, maybe expecting doubt. There was none. He slid paperwork across the table. "Then you'll need a lawyer, preferably one experienced in both family and criminal crossover cases." I nodded. "I already have a name." I stepped into the hallway and pulled out my phone. My fingers hovered for a moment before I dialed. "Jessica Winters." She answered on the third ring, her voice sharp but alert. "This is Jessica." "My name is Yasmin Alexander," I said. "I need help. My son was abused by my mother. I need to press charges and secure full protection immediately." There was a pause. Then her tone changed, professional, focused. "Where are you right now?" "Erie General. I'll be there within the hour," she said. "And Yasmin, you did the right thing." I thanked her and ended the call. Only then did it hit me. Jessica Winters. The name echoed with an old, uncomfortable memory. Because Jessica wasn't just a lawyer. She was Ethan Cole's ex-girlfriend. Ethan, my boyfriend. The man who had held me together through months of distance, who had reassured me when I cried alone in my dorm room in North Dakota, who told me I was strong, even when I felt like I was breaking. I leaned against the wall, my stomach twisting. Of all the people in the city, of all the lawyers, it had to be her. An hour later, Jessica arrived, tall, composed, dressed in a dark blazer like armor. When she saw Jamie through the glass wall of the exam room, something flickered across her face. Not judgment, not curiosity. Anger. She turned to me. "I'll take this case," she said firmly, "no matter who it involves." I studied her, searching for something dishonest. I found none. Still, the knot in my chest tightened, because now even justice felt complicated. That night, I stayed by Jamie's bedside. Machines beeped softly. The IV drip ticked time forward in tiny drops. Jamie slept fitfully, his brows furrowed, his body jerking at sounds that weren't there. I held his hand and whispered reassurances he couldn't hear, promising futures I didn't yet know how to build. Sometime past midnight, the room erupted with noise. Shouting. Footsteps. Security radios crackling. I looked up just as a familiar, ruined face appeared at the end of the hallway. Dale, my brother. Drunk, unshaven, eyes bloodshot and wild. "What the hell is going on?" he slurred, shoving past a security guard. "You think you can call the cops on your own family?" I stood immediately, positioning myself between him and Jamie's room. "Leave," I said, my voice low. "You're not welcome here." He laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "You disappear for a year," he sneered, pointing at me. "Then you come back playing the hero? You abandoned that kid." My fists clenched. "That money was for Jamie," I said. "Not for you." Dale's face twisted with rage. "Compensation," he yelled. "She had to deal with that brat while you ran away. We deserved it." I shook my head slowly. "By starving him?" I asked. "By tying him up?" Something snapped in his eyes. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a folding knife. The metal glinted under the hospital lights. "You don't know what I've been through," he hissed. "Don't judge me." Security shouted. Police rushed in. "Drop the weapon," an officer commanded. For one horrifying second, I thought Dale might charge. Instead, the knife clattered to the floor. They restrained him, cuffed his hands behind his back. As they dragged him away, he twisted to look at me, hatred burning in his gaze. "This isn't over," he spat. "You'll regret this." I didn't answer. I just stood there, shaking, until the hallway went quiet again. When I returned to Jamie's room, he was awake. His eyes darted to the door. "Mom," he whispered, "is he gone?" I nodded, sitting beside him. "Yes, he can't hurt you anymore." He studied my face like he was memorizing it. "Promise?" he asked. I took his hand and held it firmly. "I promise." 2 weeks later, after countless interviews, medical exams, and sleepless nights, I made a decision that shocked everyone, including myself. I resigned from the North Dakota job. There was a penalty, $12,000, money I could barely afford to lose. But when I told Jamie I wasn't leaving again, his face lit up like I'd handed him the world. And in that moment, I understood something with brutal clarity. Money can rebuild houses. It cannot rebuild trust. And I was done gambling with my sons. The days after Dale's arrest blurred together into a haze of paperwork, hospital corridors, and quiet moments where my heart would suddenly race for no reason, like it was bracing for a threat that never quite arrived. Jamie stayed at Erie General for several days. His body slowly responded to care, warm meals, IV fluids, clean sheets. But his mind lagged behind, stuck in survival mode. He startled whenever someone opened the door too fast. He flinched when nurses reached out too suddenly. And every night, without fail, he woke up crying, clutching my arm like it was the last solid thing left in the world. "Don't let them take me," he'd whisper. "I won't," I'd murmur back, over and over, until the words felt carved into my bones. A CPS investigator and a detective interviewed Jamie gently, carefully. I sat beside him the entire time, one hand wrapped around his. His voice trembled as he spoke. "She would clean me and change my clothes before you called," he said softly. "She told me I had to smile. If I didn't smile, I wouldn't get dinner." My chest tightened until it hurt. "And after the calls?" the investigator asked. "She locked me in this dark room," Jamie whispered. "Uncle Dale said if I told the truth, bad people would hurt you where you worked." The room fell silent. The investigators exchanged looks I never wanted to see directed at my child. Every sentence Jamie spoke felt like a blade, slicing through the version of myself who thought I was being a responsible mother. I should have noticed. I should have known. But guilt didn't help Jamie heal. Action did. Jessica Winters became a constant presence, sharp, relentless, terrifyingly competent. She documented everything, subpoenaed bank records, lined up witnesses. I watched her work with equal parts gratitude and unease. Because every time she spoke, every time she leaned in to explain strategy, I could hear Ethan's voice in my head. "That's my ex." I finally told him the truth one night when Jamie was asleep. We sat on opposite sides of the motel room bed, exhaustion hanging between us. "Jessica Winters is my lawyer," I said quietly. Ethan didn't react at first. Then he nodded once. "I know." "That surprised me." "You do?" "She told me," he said. "Before she took the case. She wanted me to hear it from her." That helped, a little. "I don't care about history," Ethan continued, his voice steady. "I care about Jamie, and I care about you." I exhaled a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Still, I kept my guard up, because trust, once shattered, doesn't come back easily, even with people who haven't hurt you. 2 weeks later, Jamie was discharged. We moved into a small, cheap apartment not far from the hospital. Bare walls, mismatched furniture. But it was quiet, safe, and it was ours. The criminal case moved faster than I expected. Francis was charged with child abuse and neglect. Dale faced charges for embezzlement, parole violation, and threatening behavior. The first time I saw my mother in court, she didn't look at me. She stared straight ahead like I was already dead to her. And I realized, strangely, painfully, that she'd made that decision long before I ever did. The trial itself felt unreal. Medical reports were read aloud, photos displayed, bank statements traced my money, Jamie's money, straight into Dale's accounts. Mrs. Mildred testified, her hands shaking but her voice strong. Jamie's former teacher spoke through tears about absences, bruises, excuses that never added up. Francis's defense tried to paint her as an overwhelmed grandmother, a woman forced into discipline because her daughter abandoned her responsibilities. When it was my turn to speak, I stood slowly. "I made a choice," I said. "A terrible one. I believed earning money meant protecting my child. I was wrong." I swallowed hard. But I trusted my mother to love my son when I couldn't be there, and that trust was used to destroy him. The courtroom was silent. The verdict came weeks later. Francis was sentenced to 5 years in prison. Dale received 7. A restraining order was issued, permanent unless I chose otherwise. When the gavel came down, my mother collapsed in her seat. My brother screamed. I felt nothing. No relief. No triumph. Just a quiet, aching emptiness where a family used to be. The civil case followed. We were awarded damages, money I knew we might never fully see. But the point wasn't the money. It was the record, the proof, the line drawn in ink that said, what they did was wrong. 6 months after that flight home, my life looked nothing like it used to. I worked a lower-paying local job with stable hours. Jamie started at a new school where no one knew his story. Therapy became part of our routine. Slowly, carefully, he began to smile again. One night, as he lay beside me, his head on my arm, he said something that made my eyes burn. "Mom," he murmured, "I don't want to remember Grandma's house anymore. I just want to remember us." I kissed his hair and held him close, because I understood now, more clearly than ever, that sometimes you have to lose everything you thought mattered to protect what truly does. 6 months. That's how long it took for the world to stop feeling like it was constantly tilting beneath my feet. 6 months since that flight home, the one I thought would be a surprise reunion, and instead became the day my life split into, before and after. Jamie started first grade again. Technically behind for his age, though his principal assured me it was the healthiest choice. After what he'd been through, no one expected him to run at the same pace as other children. And honestly, neither did I. Some mornings he still woke up crying. Other nights, he slept so deeply I'd sit beside him just to make sure his chest was still rising and falling. But slowly, the fear loosened its grip. He made friends. He laughed. Real laughter. The kind that comes from the belly instead of the throat. He started bringing home drawings again, taping them proudly to our fridge like trophies. One evening, as I tucked him into bed, he looked up at me with cautious seriousness. "Mom," he asked, "you're not going away again, right?" I didn't dodge the question. I didn't soften it with promises about the future I couldn't guarantee. I told him the truth. "I will always choose you," I said, "even when it's hard." He nodded slowly, as if filing that away somewhere deep inside himself. The civil verdict arrived on a gray Tuesday morning. A thick envelope, official seals, final words. We were awarded $75,000, the stolen money plus compensation for Jamie's trauma. I knew better than to believe we'd ever see most of it. Prison doesn't produce paychecks, and bitterness doesn't generate restitution. But the number wasn't what mattered. What mattered was the sentence printed in black ink. The abuse occurred, the neglect was proven, the responsibility was theirs. That validation closed a wound I didn't realize was still bleeding. Jessica Winters shook my hand after the final hearing. "You protected your son," she said quietly. "That's what matters." I thanked her, sincerely. Whatever history existed between her and Ethan no longer mattered. She had stood on the right side of the line when it counted. Ethan stayed. He didn't push, didn't rush, didn't try to play savior. He simply showed up, helped assemble furniture, cooked dinner on nights when I was too tired to function, sat quietly beside Jamie while he worked through homework with a seriousness that broke my heart. Trust rebuilt slowly, brick by brick. Mrs. Mildred became a regular presence in our lives. She brought casseroles, knitted scarves, and once, unexpectedly, Jamie announced she was his fairy godmother. "She saved me from the bad witch," he explained proudly. And for the first time since everything happened, I laughed. Not out of irony, not out of pain, but out of something that felt dangerously close to peace. I'm not rich now. Financially, I'm barely comfortable. Some months are still tight. I still check my bank account before buying anything unnecessary. But I sleep. And more importantly, Jamie sleeps. Every night before bed, he curls into my side and tells me stories about school, about imaginary adventures, about things that have nothing to do with fear. We don't talk about Francis. We don't talk about Dale. Because those names no longer have a place in our home. And if there's one thing I've learned, one truth I wish someone had told me sooner, it's this. Money can rebuild houses. It can't rebuild childhoods. And no future is worth sacrificing a child's safety for. So if you're listening to this story and wondering whether I was wrong to leave my son behind while I went to work far away, I ask you this instead. What matters more, the mistake, or what you do the moment you realize it? Thank you for listening. And if this story moved you, share it. Talk about it. Protect the children in your life. Because sometimes the most dangerous people aren't strangers. They're family.